But I would offer these several recommendations that I think we did achieve a certain degree of consensus on. There is still this great recognition that in many ways, the phrase was used in the group today, the elephant in the room is India. And unfortunately, we didn't have a representative from India on the working group. But the influence of India, the persistent perception of Pakistan, their rationale for strategic depth in Afghanistan, et cetera, leads us to continue to recommend that all efforts be expended to help either encourage the Pakistanis to reframe their strategic position or to actually go about resolving some kind of acceptable resolution of the India-Pakistan situation in their relationship. Secondly, we gained some consensus that while we didn't believe that we should necessarily shelve a counterinsurgency or a counterterrorism or a military element of a strategy, we did believe that a more ambitious and robust approach to reconciliation and reintegration was warranted, not in lieu of the current counterinsurgency strategy, but as an element of a much larger overarching political strategy, which both counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, as well as reconciliation and reintegration would be a component. And within that framework, it was necessary to define terms, objectives, and goals so that when we speak of reconciliation, it's with a common set of objectives and goals. That secondly, it's necessary to gain broad international consensus about what reconciliation and reintegration in Afghanistan might mean. Thirdly, it must be a broad and inclusive dialogue, meaning that there has to be representation from the major stakeholders in the region, not just the Afghans themselves or the leadership of the Taliban. And at number four, that while it's important to have red lines in terms of our own negotiating strategy, it's important to avoid setting preconditions just to get to the table. So we should set aside, we should recommend to the Afghan government and to other major players that we ought to set aside terms to come to the table and leave the debate and the discussion and the negotiation about the outcomes, the terms, be part of the negotiations themselves. The final recommendation that I would offer to you is sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card for me. And that's what I would invite those of you who are participating in the dinner this evening to do, is listen to the debate between Christopher Hitchens and Ambassador Peter Galbraith when they answer the question, can Afghanistan be won? And they'll bring all this into a very nice and tidy solution for you that we were unable to reach on our own this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Wood. I guess in terms of immediacy and complexity, it's not controversial to say that Afghanistan, Pakistan looms large in the public mindset, the policymaking arena, and of course in this conference as well. But when we hear of military entanglements, need to win over insurgents, regional instability, it's I guess depressing, but important to recognize that we have been here before in recent years. So I think on that note we move on to another John and another partner from NDU. And the group on Iraq, which was Iraq ready to go it alone, a very difficult and serious question. And that was run by Dr. John Ballard, who is the Dean of Faculty and Academic Programs and also Professor of Strategic Studies at the NISA Center at NDU. John was very helpful in terms of putting together the conference program, and he has a real high caliber background in this area. He was previously Professor of Strategic Studies at the National War College, Professor of Joint Military Operations at the Naval War College, and Professor of History at the Joint Forces Staff College. And I'll hand over to you, John.
Thank you very much. Again, our topic was Iraq, ready or not to go it alone. And as you may well understand, this is not the first of these many discussions we've had about Iraq here recently. However, I would tell you it was one of the most rich and fruitful discussions that we've had, mostly because of the broad backgrounds and the deep interest of all the people who were participating. We actually broke this down into three panels, one looking at the political situation today in Iraq, The second, looking at the domestic security situation in Iraq. And then finally, we looked much more broadly at the regional security situation going forward for Iraq. In summary, I would tell you that our tone throughout was, I would characterize as realistic, but confident of continued Iraqi national improvement. And we sort of looked around a variety of issues, and we may not have come up with specific recommendations, but we did develop a certain number of consensus opinions and a couple of, I think, very useful thoughts for everyone. We started recognizing, of course, that when we think about a way forward, we're looking at this from the perspective of very different clocks. The United States, the Iraqi political clock, and the clock, of course, of the Iraqi people themselves. There is a SOFA agreement that has a timeline associated with it, and that drove us to a certain number of questions about how quickly or how well. Our first sort of conclusion overall was that we really think that whoever the next prime minister will be when Iraq finally forms its government, it will probably not be the current prime minister, and it may in fact not be the man who gained the most votes in the election. It will more likely be a candidate representing a broader constituency, and that person may indeed be a weaker prime minister than the current prime minister, in fact, has become over time. Secondly, we looked at a number of issues that have been brewing for a while in Iraq, and we determined that the issue of Kirkuk will not likely be solved anytime soon. It's very complex, but it itself is not likely to block forward progress in Iraq. Similarly, the passage of the hydrocarbon law, which many people focus on as a problem in the country, we felt that all that it represents will eventually come to pass, regardless of whether there's actually a law passed the way it is today or not. Finally, of immediate importance, we felt that the Iraqi security forces are really only designed for domestic security. And there are severe problems with their utilization for both border security and other functions within the state, but they certainly have not been built or designed to do any sort of external power projection. Now, within this consensus view, we also felt it very clearly that the current design of the Iraqi security forces is not self-sustainable. There has to be something else that comes along that allows them to fully carry out the functions, even of domestic security. And therefore, there is a problem if the SOFA is executed in a timely manner and if U.S. forces withdraw. If there is this new, likely more weak prime minister, it will be difficult, if not, we think, impossible to negotiate a new status of forces agreement. That puts us in a difficult situation. It was characterized in a variety of ways, all derogatory, but essentially we're in a very muddy, very difficult solution where more needs to be done, but neither government could be viewed as backing off of the timeline as currently announced. Some of our other consensus views. Most of Iraq's regional neighbors are weary of a military powerful Iraq or a strong central government in Iraq. On the positive side, most Iraqis are learning, however slowly, to hold the central government responsible for their lack of essential services. And we're seeing increasing civic activities that will become important as time passes in Iraq. We feel fairly strongly that Iranian influence in Iraq will continue. It will be important. It will probably not grow, but it's always going to be a very difficult and complex circumstance between the two nations. As we looked around the region, we also felt that the future of Iraq would not be constrained by a lack of strategic relationships with other regional powers. And what we're speaking about here is Turkey, for example, which has changed its relationship significantly, its global relationship significantly, but certainly is evolving its relationship with Iraq. And we talked a little bit about the lack of impetus on the part of other Arab states to join in with Iraq and deal with Iraq's security problems.